A creepy, young man saw her from 100 feet away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. Welcome to Daily Dose Reddit. What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? I lived alone with my dogs in a brownstone in a gated community in uptown Dallas. I worked a few miles away but came home every day for lunch to let my dogs out. After living there for about a year, I started smelling men's cologne really strong in my entryway and up my stairs. I figured it was my neighbor next door and didn't think anything of it. Then one day I found a dollar bill folded lengthwise on top of my purse. I never carry cash, nor have I ever folded a dollar bill lengthwise. Thought it was weird. A few weeks later I came home and both my dogs were standing in front of my bedroom door wagging their tails and staring at the door. I figured they wanted to lay on my bed, but I was in a hurry and walked them real fast and went back to work. When I came home that day, there were 20 or so dollar bills folded lengthwise and placed neatly around various surfaces in my room. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I grabbed my dogs and noped the F out of that place as fast as I could. I called the cops, they came out, my locks were changed, but I could never be there alone again. I moved a month or so later. When I moved, I found dollar bills taped to the back of pictures on my walls, under furniture, and random places. I never figured out who or why or even how. I think the scariest thing of all is knowing that day when I was home, whoever had been going into my house was waiting quietly in my room, folding dollar bills, and my little dogs knew it. When I was about 13, I was an adventure explorer wannabe. I used to pack a tent and survival gear to go camping up the hill about 4 miles from my house, elevated 1,200 feet. I set up my tent in this small field almost entirely surrounded by woods. I made my beans, went to sleep. I was woken up at 3 a.m. to the sound of what I thought was a wild animal approaching the tent, not unusual. Woke up at sunrise, opened the tent and found a parcel wrapped in white aged cloth, tied in straw string with a note on top, "Welcome friend." Inside the parcel, get this, a calf leg hoof. Never told a soul about it to this day. Scared the soul out of me. Never went camping again, and didn't stop thinking about it for months. This was probably a story on the news, but my dad's coworkers came across materials to make a bomb in someone's luggage at the airport he works at. It turns out there was a suicidal IT student that wasn't planning on hurting anyone. He just wanted to assemble the bomb when he got to his destination and then try to kill himself. I heard that he's doing better now, but it's still pretty scary. I was probably 11 or 12. There was a telephone pole in our backyard that stood in the middle of our back fence. An electrician was working on it and needed access to our backyard for a couple days. One of the nights, my best friend was over for a sleepover, and we were in the fort we made in my room. I was facing toward her, away from my bedroom door, and she gets startled and lets put kind of a half-hearted scream, yelp. She said she thought for a split second she saw a mon's face peering between the sheets through the entrance to our fort. We both felt really creeped out the rest of the night but just fell asleep eventually. The next day or so my family realized that 2 of our motor scooters we kept in the back were missing, and sometime later my dad recognized the electrician on Sacramento's Top 10 Wanted. I'm pretty sure that night was the night he stole the scooters, and he must have come inside the house through the back door and left or something when he realized we were awake. I have a room in my basement that someone could be living in. In fact, until I looked in it the other day, I was almost positive there was one. We have a Google Home Mini down there and I kept on getting search notifications when I was at work. Turns out it could hear my Bill talking to his phone. I also checked the room and there was no evidence of anyone living in there. I was walking in the woods once when I saw a blue tent, or what had once been a tent. It was torn to shreds and the poles were snapped and it was all in a messy pile in the middle of a clearing. From a distance, it had looked like this clearing was full of cream-colored flowers, but as I got closer I realized they were pieces of paper. Pages from Stephen King's The Shining, to be precise. They were charred around the outside as though someone had set light to them, and the fact that they were individual made it look like someone had really wanted to destroy the book. I shrugged it off. It was a very neat setup for whatever project the film students from the nearby school would be making, I told myself. Very well done, guys, very creepy. It made the news shortly afterwards that a man from the next town over who had been missing for a long time had finally turned up. Dead. In his blue tent in the woods. I don't know if he was still in there when I walked past. I don't want to know. Former coworker of my brother put mercury, the metal, into his milkshake when no one was looking to try to kill him. He was caught, but apparently there was no motive other than it was something he wanted to do. No animosity or jealousy towards my brother. I thought I had a dream of riding my bike in Las Vegas when I was 5 or 6. In the dream an old man walked up to me, cut my arm and knocked me off my bike, and I woke up at home. I had stitches on my arm and my parents later told me I was riding my bike and crashed, but deep down I'm 100% sure that that man really had cut me and thrown off my bike. I wasn't sure till I was 13 to 14 when my neighbor asked me if I remembered the time when he found me bleeding next to my bike. Out of curiosity I asked him if he remembered if anyone was around, and he said there was an elderly man walking away from me about 20 yards ahead. To this day I'm still scared of what would have happened if my neighbor hadn't seen me in the front. It actually happened a couple months ago during the Minnesota hunting opener. Was out late in the afternoon, maybe an hour before dark, sitting by myself near the edge of my grandparents' property, when I hear crazed screaming. It went on for over a minute, and I swore I heard some other sort of commotion off the distance with it. I quickly recorded it on my phone and got the F out of there. Showed it to my brothers, who said they didn't hear anything at all, and they said that was some freaky shit. After hearing it, my older brother poked fun at us, saying, "Sounds like you caught a Wendigo sounds on camera, or perhaps the goat man." Either way I'm still spooked by what I heard. My grandmother later told us that there was a lady a few properties down that was off her meds, and their neighbors could have been dealing with her after she saw them hunting near her property. Which could actually explain the extra commotion I heard. But, I haven't left out the possibility of it being a rabbit being attacked, or even a fox making its screeching noise. I definitely know it was a car on the road nearby because when I pulled out my phone to record it, I caught the sound of a car, and they sound nothing similar. My first girlfriend's house was probably haunted. It was a newer house built late 80s early 90s which used to be woods in Connecticut. This happened in 2001. We were having an after-school snack in her kitchen when she told me she had previously seen an old man with a large white beard sitting in her living room. I laughed it off since the house was so new, and the property firmly being woods meant it couldn't possibly be haunted. A few weeks later, similar situation with her in the kitchen and me returning from the bathroom. As I walk into the kitchen I see a man in her dining room sitting at the head of the table. I don't see a beard, but it was an old man. Me trying to be as scientific about it. Deny what I saw since my GF gave me enough information my mind could be playing tricks on me. Fast forward a few months. The whole thing is basically forgotten and we didn't have any other encounters. She had a friend visiting from Brazil. Her friend was downstairs next to the living room while my GF and I are doing our thing upstairs. All of a sudden her friend burst through the door crying. She asks in Portuguese what happened. She goes on to explain, "I was downstairs tending to music with my headphones in when I turned the corner to go into the living room, and basically ran into this old man with a long white beard." I know my GF wouldn't have told her because we both didn't take it too serious. I know I didn't say anything since her friend barely spoke English. To this day I still want to write the new owners of the house if they encountered the white bearded man. We were living in São Paulo, Brazil when I was around 4 or 5 years old. My family and I lived in a really tall building. High up enough to get a good view of the city. One night, I had a dream that I was flying over the city. As if I had stepped out of my room, onto the balcony and started flying, floating over the city lights. Next morning, my stepfather came in scolding me. Apparently he saw me come in from the balcony, and I had left the door open. He tried getting my attention, but I just kept walking back to my bed. Where I went back to sleep, and he thought I was ignoring him. He pulled me out of bed. My mom is now up at the time from him yelling at me, and sure enough, the balcony door was wide open. I tried to tell my parents I didn't do anything, but he said he saw me come back in from the balcony. That night has always stuck with me. I've always thought that perhaps I was sleepwalking, but the thing is, it never happened again. Nor did it happen before that night. It gives me the deep chills just remembering it. In 4th grade, my friend brought a picture to school with her to share among our group of friends. We passed it around talking about it. It was just a picture of her family, so we thought nothing of it. After school, me and her were hanging out by a tree and talking about the picture. She pointed at something that everyone in our group has brushed over. It was a very clear and visible face looking over her shoulder. And I can't joke about this, it was a serious face in an otherwise normal family photo. When I asked who that was, she said she didn't know and there had been no one behind her when they took the picture. Sometimes I think about it and it's quite freaky. That one South American serial killer that murdered and raped hundreds of children, he'd lure them away with a promise of work or something similar, usually into the woods. I believe he was also released and his location is unknown. The story of the Yuba Count 5. 5 young men go missing. Their car is found in working condition high on a mountain road where they had no reason to be. 3 are eventually found dead in the mountains. 1 is found dead in a ranger's cabin, having starved to death. The 5th has never been found. This happened in 1978. I read about it 2 summers ago and slept with my lights on for weeks. Something about this just absolutely terrifies me. My uncle, when he was in his teens, witnessed a UFO event. He was at the beach in the middle of the day when he saw an oval-shaped object about half a kilometer up in the sky. He said that everyone, there were over 100 other people at the beach, and they all witnessed this, could see that the object was huge, big enough that if it had come down, it would have flattened the entire beach. Everyone watched it for about half an hour, and during that time it didn't move one bit. Heaps of people were just standing or sitting around, watching it. My uncle said, and this is an almost direct quote, "You know how you sometimes feel like you just have to get out of a place, like you have to take off running? Well, this was different. You felt the opposite, like you had to stay." After half an hour, the object started moving very slowly, and then it just shot sideways extremely fast and disappeared. No plane or human-made flying object could have moved in that way, or looked like that, unless the government was, or is developing technologies we know nothing of. It's a strong possibility. My grandfather fought during the invasion of the Soviet Union as a proud Hungarian soldier. I'm not disclosing his division or anything like it, but he only killed other soldiers. This is not a story about ghosts, like he once told me, or a story about his combat, also. In my opinion, it's far more creepy. I'm on mobile, by the way. I can't recall which year was it, but they were deep into Rusland by the time. They would pass by some villages, some in which the population saw them as liberators, others in which they killed partisans as it was necessary. Well, once he passed through this one village that was stuck into his memory. First thing he saw was an old lady sitting outside her house, her broom by her side, immobile. Then, it happened to them that the entire village was recently dead. People had food prepared still on their plates, and all. It was like everybody simply dropped dead while doing their daily chores. He vividly remembered those 2 guys that looked like they were having small talk when they dropped dead. He believes it was some kind of German or Soviet chemical weapon testing. Spooky as F, anyway. I bike to work since the bus doesn't get there early enough, but when I'm biking home after my shift ends it gets dark fast because it's winter right now. I like to listen to my music, but for some reason my headphones stopped working. I gave up on them and threw them away before heading out from work. I wasn't particularly feeling hurried to get home and decided to stop for a latte at the gas station and a few snacks and walk my bike the rest of the way home. There's a bridge I have to walk over to get to the main road where my house is, and underneath are train tracks. I was walking along the side of the road minding my own business where I got this weird feeling to look behind me. I do nothing, so I turned back around. Then I heard a loud crunch, and 30 seconds later I look behind me and see a man dressed in all black walking towards me. He's very muscular and has a black hoodie on. I couldn't make out any facial details, but in his right hand it looked like he was holding something heavy. I didn't even think about it, I jumped on my bike and booked it. I was still about 2/3 RDS of a mile away from home that I covered in like 5 minutes flat. If I'd had my headphones in I wouldn't have heard that man come up behind me. I still biked to and from home, but that situation could have turned out a lot worse. I had this friend that lived in a trailer park. Whenever I would go to visit, I would drive in the back gravel roads. On the way there was this old, small concrete building. Run down, no doors, some walls were crumbled. I would look at it and think I wanted to check it out. But there was always this subtle feeling that I shouldn't be in there. Every time, it gave me this lingering feeling that something was off. I found it fenced off one day, and there was some ripped up yellow tape. I thought maybe some kids were hanging around when they shouldn't have, someone threw in some complaints, and it was blocked off. But other than that I didn't think much of it. Some time later I'm sitting at my grandma's house, watching one of her shows. Might have been Dateline or something similar. They tell this story about a girl a county away that disappeared after a party. No one could find her for a while. Clothes they turned up were scattered in different areas. Then a kid found what she was wearing that night. It was in that building. My grandfather was operating a dozer up in the mountains in BC long time ago. He would get dropped off on the side of the mountain via helicopter. He was night shift and it was early evening. He said he looked and through the valley coming his way was what he described as a cigar-shaped ship. It had flames shooting from the back and it didn't make a noise. He said you could see that it had round submarine windows and you see a red light inside reflecting off the walls inside. It then went around the valley around a mountain and boom, it flew right into the sky like a lightning bolt and it was gone. He wasn't sure what he saw and then everybody was on the radio asking if they all saw that. His whole crew witnessed it. When I was 11 or 12, the dreamcatcher I'd had since I was little broke. Not a big deal, I wasn't really attached to it, but it felt weird not to have anything on hook in my ceiling. My mom took me to a market a couple days later and we found a ceiling decoration, not a dreamcatcher or anything, just some cheap crystals and beads, but it was pretty. I hung it above my bed when we got home, and that night I was woken up somewhere around midnight by footsteps outside of my bedroom. They went past the side of the house and eventually faded out, but I never heard the gate open. I didn't really think anything of it. But it happened again. Every single night without fail, between 10 p.m. and midnight, I would hear footsteps. They sounded heavy, like a guy in work boots, and they always went up the side of the house and faded without gates being opened on either side. It got to the point that I couldn't fall asleep until I'd heard them for the night. About a month later, I realized that they had started on the same night I hung the decoration up in my room. I took it down immediately and buried it in my closet. I never heard them again. Ed Gain. Growing up in a neighboring county, you would always hear the stories about the horrific things he did. Everyone is still shocked from the memory that it even happened. And no one ever brings it up in the town it happened in, but you can tell by looking at someone from Plainfield that they know, they're trying to forget. The story of John Jones, the man who got stuck in the Nutty Putty cave and died from his blood filling up his lungs and head. He was stuck head first, almost like standing on your head. The cave has been sealed up but his body is still in there since they of course couldn't get him out. Gives me shivers. Thank you so much for watching.